All right. Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar titled Understanding the Needs of Your Site and Reach. This is the first of 2 webinars in our River Access Planning series. In today's webinar, you're going to be introduced to the newly developed worksheets that accompany steps 1 and 2 of the River Access Planning Guide. We're also going to hear about a few river access planning projects and how they've worked through the first few steps of the guide, and just working through their projects. And we're also going to learn a little bit about the good, bad, and unusual database and how that can also help out when working through the first 2 steps. But first, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Angie Furman, and I'm the River Training Center Coordinator for River Management Society. And I'm going to be helping moderate today's webinar, along with my colleague, Risa Shimoda, who's joining us in the background. For those who might be unfamiliar, River Management Society's goal is to help advance the profession of river management. And we do this by providing a unique variety of forums for sharing information about the appropriate use and management of river resources. Our members include all sorts of people in different positions, from federal, state, local, and tribal river managers and rangers, outfitters and guides, planners and landscape architects, to fluvial geomorphologists, lawyers, policymakers, academics, students, researchers, authors, and more. So if you aren't already a member, I highly encourage you to check out our membership. It'll give you instant access to one of the largest networks of experienced river professionals through our membership directory, our moderated listserv. You'll also receive publications like our biweekly news digest email and quarterly RMS journal. But before we get started today, I'd like to let you all know that this presentation is being recorded and will be available in a few days on the RMS video channel. To get there, you can go to the RMS website, go to the River Training Center, and then once you're on the River Training Center website, over there on the top left button, you will see a link to the video channel. I also plan to send this out in an email to everyone in about 2 days. Also, once it's posted, you'll be able to find links to PDF copies of the handouts in the description of the video. I'd also like to take a few seconds just to point out the control panel and where to ask questions. So in that image there on the right, you'll notice that that little orange box will collapse or open your control panel. About halfway down, you might have a little arrow to look at some of the handouts. We've got 4 handouts accompanying today's webinar. And then you'll also see a question box where you can type in questions, or you can also just send us comments throughout the presentation. And again, just directing your attention to those handouts. So now I'd like to introduce today's presenters. I'm really excited. We've got a really great lineup, and I'm excited for them to share a little bit about their projects. But first, I'm going to have them introduce themselves. So I'm going to go ahead and start with Tom.
Yeah, so I'm Tom O'Keefe, and I'm the Northwest Stewardship Director for American Whitewater and have been river access and river access development for quite a while. And it's part of our organization's mission and partnering with many agencies and working with River Management Society. And we've been working on this project, right? And we've been working on this project, Management Society.
And I can jump in and go next. So hey everyone, nice to be here today with you guys. So my name is Ashley. I am a community planner with the Park Service. And I've been with the Park Service for a couple of years, so I'm newer to these kinds of projects, and I hope I can provide that perspective today. And I'm based in Missouri.
Yeah, and hi, I'm Betsy Byrne. I'm also with the National Park Service Rivers, Trails, and Conservation Assistance Program. I'm, based in Salt Lake City, Utah. And just a little background on our program. The Rivers, Trails, and Conservation Assistance Program is a community assistance arm of the National Park Service. So we work with communities on their trail projects, their river access projects, conservation projects, things like that. And so I think that's how Ashley and I both came to our respective projects.
And I guess I'm Doug Whittaker. I know I'm Doug Whittaker. I'm a researcher and planner for Confluence Research and Consulting. It's a small firm. I used to be an RTCA person 30 years ago, and still working with them periodically. And we kind of help in this area by we helped assemble a database. Actually, lots of you folks helped us assemble a database of launches and the various things that we can learn about those, including photos and some other variables. So we'll tell you about that at the end of the presentation. Might be helpful. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Again, thank you all so much for being here. I'm really excited for the presentations. Now that we know a little bit about our presenters, I'd like to launch a quick poll just to learn a little bit about you all that are joining us and what brings you here today. So we'll take a few seconds here to see what brings you here today. Again, we'll give it about 5 more seconds to see what brings you here today. If you're working on a river access project, you just completed one, you just want to learn a little bit more. All right. Go ahead and close the poll and share the results. So it looks like majority of you want to learn about river access planning, which is awesome. You are in the right spot. Well, excellent. So now I'm going to go ahead and pass it on over to Tom, who's going to kick us off.
All right. All right, are we live?
Looks great.
Okay, so I'm just going to kick us off with a little bit of context here before we dive into some individual projects. So I worked with colleague Jordan Sector on developing this river access planning guide. It's linked there in the handouts. You can look at the full document. One of the things we discovered as we were rolling this out that we found it would be helpful to have a little bit more guidance on how to apply it, and we worked with the National Park Service Rivers and Trails Conservation Assistance Program to develop a couple of worksheets that help guide steps in the process here. And we're just going to walk through some of the concepts of those worksheets today and then look at a couple of projects that apply those concepts. So in today's presentation, that's what we're going to do. That's what we're going to do is we're also linked there in the handouts that accompany the planning guide, and then Doug's going to show us some information from the database he worked on that really is a great tool for looking at precedent examples and really facilitating the brainstorming process on some of this stuff. So want to start out, some of you have probably heard this from me before that have seen me talk about this, but thinking about access and access to rivers, it's more than just getting boats to the water and more than just the launch facility. And sometimes we really get focused on construction and development of the launch facility, but we want to think a little bit more broadly than that. And there's a lot of different ways that people experience and connect to rivers. Some people are there for and just out there having fun. Others are looking for a challenge, challenging Whitewater River, a form of escape, and just going out to remote places, places of wonder, places of community. And also spiritual and cultural connections to rivers are very important for many cultures around the world. I thought I'd just take a moment here. If you're in the chat, just put a little comment there on what draws you to rivers, and what kind of experiences are you thinking about when you connect to rivers. Okay, so the planning guide, we outlined it as here to summarize and assess existing conditions, identify the types of experiences, define the desired recreation setting, evaluate site options, assess facility design, and then monitoring as a feedback loop to consider any modifications you might be considering for your facility. So we're going to really focus on these first two steps. One of the things I have learned on a lot of projects that I've been involved in is a lot of people really want to jump to step 5, thinking about the facility design, and don't do the first 4 steps, of really thinking about the types of experiences and the desired setting that you're trying to create. So we've developed these worksheets to provide somewhat of us to explore some of these questions and really make sure you have a robust understanding of who's using the place and who wants to use the place. And that's what these worksheets, again, they're attached over there in the handout section. This is a reach analysis field worksheet, and so you might use this in a situation where, okay, we're out on this river, we've got some maps of the river reach. We know that there's a need for river access somewhere in this reach. Maybe there's an existing site that's been user created social trails, and we're trying to produce something a little bit better, and we're trying to understand a little bit about the river reach as a whole and how different sites integrate together. Maybe there's some existing sites and we want to reevaluate whether they're in the right places, or if we need to think about some new places. And then the second worksheet that we have, it's more of a site-based worksheet that takes a look at like a specific site. So maybe you're not looking at the whole reach, but you're thinking, okay, I've got a site here that I want to understand how it fits in the context of the river system and analyze use and functionality of this site. And with these worksheets, I think we'll see this through the examples that we'll look at with here in a minute. But I wanted to share is that the worksheets can be a starting point. So maybe you don't use every question or every box that's here, and maybe there's some new ideas that are inspired and some new things that you want to think about as you're going through these. But we intended them to be a good starting point. So the first thing both of these worksheets do is ask some very, very basic questions about where are we, and making sure that you define all these things in different ways can be really helpful. Looking at what river reach are we on, what river mile, that's mile, that's a language, maybe some of the people doing restoration work really understand, the highway mile, here we're at milepost 27, we got to coordinate with the DOT, that's the language that they understand. And obviously latitude, longitude, we can put it in in the GIS really easily. Who owns this thing? I mean, I'm actually kind of surprised how often we encounter situations where no one really knows exactly who owns it. Is this in the highway right of way, or and sometimes that requires a little bit of legwork. But taking the time to capture all this information is really important as kind of a first step when we're looking at individual sites along a river corridor. Next, I wanted to go through what we call the core elements, and I've given a few presentations on this before. I know there was one linked in this workshop. So what I want to do today is go through each of these and how we've structured the worksheets around understanding each of these concepts here. So the first, system location and understanding the regional context of where you are. And we've got a series of questions here and guided materials to think about, where you are from a geomorphic setting, where you are, in proximity to cities. I've got a view here where we're looking at this reach of river. We're trying to find a new access site that we're interested in constructing. The county owns 2 miles of riverfront in this location, where you can see the interstate highway there at the top of the figure. This is very close to major urban centers. We're thinking about the geomorphology, what's the floodplain inundation, what are the physical characteristics of the site in terms of where the low bank areas, and just starting to look at some of that. Here's a different site on another river that's very different. That one we're just looking at is starting to transition to a little bit more alluvial setting. This is a more of a and that imposes some limitations on what we can do, but just starting to look at these physical characteristics. And in this case here, we're looking for areas where there's breaks in that bedrock wall, and where does the geology of that reach permit and facilitate access, and what are the physical constraints around that. So we've got a series of questions that help to document some of this. The next is understanding the landscape setting, and this image here, we're we're in a environment, and that's an area where we're looking a way to facilitate access for paddle sports in this constructed marina environment. You might have a natural setting that's deep in the national forest that would design criteria and design solutions, but really thinking about that. The level of development, what's the trip length? Are these day trips or longer trips? And what are the sensitive resources? So here's a place where one of the areas we're evaluated for an access site. Well, there's a bunch of traditional grind holes there that have been used for hundreds, probably thousands of years, that the local tribe would like us to avoid. So thinking about where the location of those sources is in terms of your setting, and documenting those is important. And then features and hazards, and where those are on the river reach, and one person's desirable feature might be another person's hazard. I use this example of Houston Falls on the White Salmon River. It's a place a lot of people want to take out before they get to the waterfall, and a lot of people have a desire to run this, and it's part being able to map and identify those features along the river. Where do people, maybe they just want to put in just below something, or maybe they want to put in just above something to make sure they can experience it. So making sure that you're looking at things not just from the land-based perspective, but what are the users actually trying to experience or enjoy. Temporal dependence, really understanding the season of use is important, and how people are connecting to this river. And I'm going to show you a couple of ways that I like to think about this, because weather flows, regulatory policies all may have some influence over the season. Here we are on the Yampa River, a river where the access is predominantly with the late snow melt, and design considerations might reflect what that use pattern is. And other times of the year, if it's not being used, we might really documenting when people are out there. And I always say it's really important to think about this in the context of how different activities are using it in different seasons. So we may have a situation where the whitewater boaters are out there at one time a year, and maybe it's in the early spring before the traditional Memorial Day to Labor Day recreation season. But once that maybe a little later in the year, the whitewater boaters disappear and the fishermen come in, and then maybe you have during that summer recreation season you had other activities going on. So just thinking about that season and that season of use is important, and how it changes. I really like to look at hydrographs to be able to understand this. So the first one over on the left of the Entiat River, it's this goes from October, it's an October to October, sort of water year USGS hydrograph. And what you can see over the course of the season there is the flows are relatively low through the late winter, and then spring you have snow melt, and this is a snow melt dominated system. And if we picked a number of 1,000 CFS as being the optimal flow for whitewater boating, you can see that occurs in the summer. In contrast to the Tilton River over there on the right, that's a rain-fed system. And again, if you said thousands like the threshold for optimal boating experience, you can see that happens. Late spring. Those opportunities are going away. A different river here, looking at this, and you can pull these data off the USGS website pretty easily. They do pretty good tools for doing summary statistics and looking at a system here that's rain dominated through the winter, has episodic opportunities for people to go out and enjoy that river, and then a more consistent, and then but it's also has snow melt, so it kind of combines the two that we just looked at, and opportunities that are more consistent through the summer. So this is a river where we did a project, and really understanding when people were there at the river was helpful and important. And we have a website that has information on flows in that river I was just looking at. You can look at our recommended flow range, again, crowdsourced information that's 600 to 2,000 CFS, and you can get an idea of when people are out and experiencing this river reach for that activity. Now, some other places you may have more quantitative data. If we've done, there are some rivers around the country where we've done flow studies to look at optimal flows for different types of recreational activities. We usually have a starting place for some of this information on our website, or of course guidebooks are another source of information for this. So that's a little bit on just understanding, just inspiring some thinking about that. On frequency of use, so that's how often is the site used? Is it used on a daily basis, or is it someone coming through just a couple of times a year? And then closely related, but can be distinct from this, is the density of use. So how many users do we have there at one time? And really show this series of image to just sort of illustrate how those things can interrelate. So on a river like the Memon, we have a pretty high density of use at that site relative to its capacity, and a high frequency. People are out there every single day. There's launching. And on the Selway River, you have high frequency, daily trips happening, but it's a lower density. So because it's just one trip a day that's happening. I think of that as a place that has pretty high density on those weekends in the fall when there's the reservoir drawdown. but it's not as frequent. You know, on the weekdays when they're not releasing there's, you know, really the parking lot's pretty empty. And then of course you have places that are low density and low frequency that, you know, this is literally just a bushwhack through the woods that's you know, people have flagged the trail, and it's just a social trail through the national forest that it's really only the Whitewater are using a couple of times of year at a pretty low density and low frequency. So thinking about you know, what type of activities happening on your river and frequency is, and how those things interrelate. And just sort of, you know, one brief example I give of that is, you know, if you have a place that's pretty high density but really low frequency, so maybe we're talking about happens once a year. Well, maybe you don't need a you know, a full vault toilet in that situation, and you just bring in porta potties for that event. So that's an example of, you know, what the implications are of thinking through some of these types of things. And again, the worksheets highlight and illustrate that. And challenge level. So this is where we really get into, you know, what are people doing out there, and what types of experiences are they engaging in? And this, you know, this is where you might start to see some of the user conflicts that might be emerging. You know, this is the Rogue River at one of the launch sites. It's this great beach, and you can see, you know, the launch ramp has just become a place for people to hang out, in the staging area for boats, where people are normally, you know, staging their boats, is, you know, kind of this picnic and water play area. You can see someone set up a tent here. So really thinking about, like, okay, so what types of activities are occurring at this site? And if we, you know, start to have some user conflicts emerging, can we find ways to segregate and accommodate their activities? And one of the places that I love that I think really does a great job of this is this Hammer Creek recreation site on the lower Salmon River, where it's got, you know, a nice picnic area. It's got with water access at day use, and then it's got the launch area and the staging area, and then there's a campground that also has water access. And, you know, obviously it's a place where there's a lot of real estate to work with, but it's really a nice, it's one of the, you know, where someone was very thoughtful and thinking about the different types of activities that everyone wants to do at this site, and how do we plan for and accommodate that in a meaningful and intentional way. And that second worksheet has a series of questions that we would hope, you know, would be able to guide folks in being able to, you know, think through some of this. And finally, I'm going to just in terms of these core elements, you know, focus on management here, and, you know, who is managing the site, who's the land manager, and what's their level of involvement and engagement. And, you know, here you have, you know, the Snake River on Alpine Canyon, where the Forest Service is there with their little kiosk, and people with visitors to the river, and helping you know, direct some of the activity and use that's happening there. In other places, you don't have that level of management. So, you know, how does that factor into your site design and what you're able to do? So really thinking about, you know, is it a place where you'll have, you know, like this location where you have, you know, a representative from the BLM literally, you know, greeting every trip that comes to this river in Utah here, and doing a little overview of what's going on? Or is it more of a site where you users to kind of figure things out, and how does that factor into your design? So I'm gonna end with that, and you know, I guess to just summarize all with the worksheets is to try and provide a structured way of thinking through, some of the questions you might ask about the river reach that you're working on, and the either maybe considering or that you're evaluating for potential, improvements or upgrades. And we're going to walk through a couple of examples now from different parts of the country, and then we'll come back to Doug will show, once you've kind of gone through defining some of the needs and characteristics of your reach, what are some of the solutions that you might approach, and the database that Doug and his team at Confluence have produced is a great tool for thinking about that. But what I want to leave everyone with is, make sure you do your homework on the front end of really understanding using your site, not just the paddlers, but everyone else that wants this, basic contact access to the river, and make sure that you're thinking about that and doing a good job of documenting that, and provide a process to be able to do that. So I will pause there. And Angie, do you have anything to add, or is?
Hey, Tom, I have a question. This is Risa. Well, it's not my question, but Shannon chimed in earlier before we get too far away and may not address it. Shannon says the river I'm planning around needs a safe walking trail for the community that does not add the erosion issues in the river. So where might that consideration be in the planning process?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that's just a great example to document those needs up front as part of this first step of like, what am I? Okay, maybe I want to do a access here, but I need this community trail for people that desire access to the river. And I mean, early on, when I was first involved in this 20 years ago, I can't tell you how many times that I was like, I thought I was building a boat access, and then everyone just kind of showed up at that place from the community, and I was like, oh, what was a place for contact access to the water? And it'd be good to, I think just the fact that we're thinking about that in a place, that's key. So just.
Okay, thank you.
I did see a couple other questions come in. What are the top 3 river systems in the US you'd say have the best access conditions in terms of access site frequency, i.e. the number of access sites, diversity of infrastructure or site attributes, and high use? And if you want to think of that, and we could come back, or you can answer that now.
I mean, just a couple that, I mean, obviously that, the facilities on the Snake River in Alpine Canyon, I don't know if there's a place that I've ever seen quite as much activity is there. So, high frequency and density, there's a lot going on there in the summer. A lot of activity, the takeout there for the Yampa River in Utah, the Gauley River. There's some interesting things that have been done there at a site that sees a lot of use, but it's it's a little, and river managers have kind of adopted some strategies to deal with that, and we have accessory supplemental parking available. So those are just some quick thoughts. But yeah, I mean, that's what Doug's start to think about that question of like, where else have I seen my, where else am I seeing this type of situation, and what are people doing?
Thanks, Tom. I also saw a few people out in the Snake, Green River, Maine, Middle Fork of the Salmon Rivers for heavy trip volumes. So thank you all for adding in your thoughts and questions into the question box. And I think at this point, we're going to move on to Ashley, and we can come back to any remaining questions at the end. So I'm going to go ahead and give Ashley control there.
Okay, you should be able to see my PowerPoint, right?
Correct.
There we go.
Yep, looks great.
Let me minimize this real quick. Pull up that. Okay, great. Well, yeah, I'm really happy to be here today to talk through this project a little bit more and how I use the worksheets. So a little bit of background information and timeline. I started this project over the past couple of years. It kicked off back in 2019. There was a workshop there to reveal the river access planning guide and to ask for some feedback. So that was fall of 2019. And so I wanted to build off of that momentum to work with the park unit on some access points as well. And so now we're starting to move into planning for a workshop in the summer that would be choosing the best alternatives. So I use these worksheets retroactively. So I had already gone out to the area in August. And so I was able to look back on the worksheets and back on my planning process to see where the gaps were at. So this is a picture that was taken during that time. I think there are a couple people on the call from there as well. So there's Darren there. But as you can tell, the river's pretty slow moving. There are some rapids, but they're like class 1, maybe class 2. And it's fairly hilly as well, and lots of trees and vegetation too. There we go. And so this is a map of Missouri. So there are some National Park Service places in Missouri, including the one that I've been working with. So that's Ozark for short. So it was established in 1964. So it does predate the Wild and Scenic Act, but it is managed like one of those rivers. And it is comprised of 2 different rivers and is totaling 134 miles. It is very long, as you can tell, so that makes it a challenge to go between because there are only, I think, around 5 crossings on the river or so. So that is definitely a challenge for management. And it does see high use, typically from May to September will be during that use, and on the weekends especially. So we got to go there in August, so we got to see that firsthand. And I grew up in Missouri as well, so I've heard of it before, and float trips are really popular here. And then this shows a map of the river as well. And so as you can see, they start up here and they flow here to the bottom right side. So there are many points of access, and these range from being pretty developed to not really developed at all. And the red circle here is the reach that I've been looking at from my project. So it's comprised of 3 different points of access. It's very popular reach of the river since it is around a 2 to 4 hour float to one of the main towns right here. And so it is a dynamic river as well, with the river channels always moving, as well as the gravel bar, gravel bars will also move over time too. There are some species that are unique to this area, as well as some that are endangered too. And there are trails and campgrounds and concessionaires, caves. There's a lot going on here. And so the stretch that I've been looking at is Waymire Stretch is what it's called. And there's 3 points of access. So you have Pin Oak up here, which is for concessionaires only. It was intended as a campground day use area, but they had a very large flood, like a 300-year flood 5 years ago that like washed out a lot of that. And so now it's being used by concessionaires, which means that they have to drive a long way along this road, which is pretty narrow in some spots. And then below that is Chilton. So this has a boat ramp, which means that there are conflicts between the floaters who are going downstream and then the boats going upstream. And you can see, there's a busload that drops off the floaters. So it's a large number of people coming down. And then further down is Waymire. So this is private put in right now, and it used to have concessionaire there before that big flood. And there is an archaeological bench up here, so that puts constraints on what can be built up here. That really does constrain it in a lot of ways, because the best spots for building most likely do have the archaeology there too. And it is a dynamic river, as I said, and you can see in this picture on the right here that it shows the active channel. And so you can tell from, it's pretty stable right here, which would be a great place to build, which is where the archaeology is. And then right around here, it's very dynamic, and then it gets more stable right here. So over time, this gravel bar that you see in the picture on the left down here at the bottom, it's actually moved over to the right and down. So it is no longer there. So there used to be a gravel bar there, and it's no longer there. And so that's the challenge that we're trying to solve. And this is some pictures of the 3 areas. So Pin Oak is for concessionaires, like I said. So it's a very large parking lot that used to be a day use area. And then further down is Chilton. So this is here's the boat ramp that has held up pretty well. And it is angled to go with the flow of the river. But you can already see that there are some rafts down here. So that can be challenging. And this is Waymire, so this is private access. The gravel bar you see off to the upper left in the picture, that used to be all the way here where these people are at. So it's just been a challenge to, to plan for the constant change that happens here. And currently they are just kind of cutting back into the bank so people have a slope that's easier, but it just continues to erode away. And so, like I said, I started this process a couple of years ago, and so it's been mostly an internal planning process, so internal to the Park Service, where we got the local park perspective, we got the regional perspective, as well as the national, and it was really important to bring in a geomorphologist who would be able to tell us more about how the river is moving and changing. And so we have them on board, as well as some landscape architects too. So my role in this has been to build the team to help choose the best alternative for the river reach. This has been an issue for a decade or so, and many options have been thrown out there, each with their own pros and cons. And so it can be difficult to choose a path forward when it's not necessarily easy per se. So that's where these worksheets come in handy. And like I said, I use it retroactively. So I had already done a lot of this research. I wish that I had these at the time. I did rely on the planning guide quite a bit as well, but I definitely love a template that I can build off of. So I did look back at these and see where my gaps were at. And like Tom said, these are a good starting point. So I'm newer to this kind of work, and so sometimes you don't even know the questions to ask. And so that's kind of where I was at the beginning of this project. Like, you don't know what you don't know, but you also don't know what questions to ask. So I definitely relied on a team of people to provide some of that input, and the worksheets do that as well. I think they help to guide you through the questions, to collect the data, and to really set your project up in a great way. And they also provide some common language as well. In the picture on the right, you can see some of like the language that's used in there. And so some of this was new to me when I first started this project. And I think it's useful for when you're trying to communicate with the experts that speak this language, as well as just your project team too, to be able to use the correct terms to describe these, can be really useful. And it can provide some continuation of the project as well. So say that the project team changes, you always have these to refer back to. And so you can use these to inform people who may join the team later as well. And the part can use this in the future so that they don't duplicate the information that's collected, because that does take some time to track down as well. And then I've used this as a collaboration tool as well. So looking at some of the questions it asks, and being able to ask those to the archaeologist, to the hydrologist, just to be able to talk through this. And I've done that. Well, I would do that prior to going out there as well. So I'll definitely do that in future projects going forward. I'll use these at the beginning of a project, but I would also use these whenever I go out there to get more information and context on it as well. And I do have an upcoming workshop for this project, like I said, so I'm going to look through these and see what I can use from these worksheets to facilitate that for choosing the best option. And it may even be too that maybe these are sent out beforehand that for people to review as well. So I used both of the worksheets since I looked at a reach as well as individual sites. And so that was really useful too, to be able to have both to look at the larger context as well. And so, yeah, I found these to be really useful, and I'm excited to use these for future projects as well. So that's kind of how I used it. That's all I got for you guys.
Thanks, Ashley. And just real quick, I did see one question come in about the worksheet approach, and maybe you or Tom could answer this. Does this worksheet approach allow you to assess and grade launch site options to determine which sites are best? I don't know, Tom, if you might have some input on that.
Yeah, I think the way I would answer that is it provides the we're actually going to talk about that workshop is evaluating the alternatives, and this is you know, collecting the information, and then what we've done on a couple of projects is then we can put it all into a matrix, and then once we've defined our objective steps and, you know, who's using it, we can evaluate the sites against the program objectives we've defined for the site. So I would say stay tuned on that one, but yes.
Great, thanks, Tom. And thanks again, Ashley. So pass it over to Betsy. Right now we are seeing email. All right, now we see your 360
Great.
photo.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, just trying to click on the right monitor screen. Here we go. So hi everyone, I'm Betsy Byrne. Like I said, I'm based here in Salt Lake City with RTCA, and the project that I'm gonna talk about is the Moab boat ramp. And I think probably a lot of people might be familiar with this site, given, you know, how well-known Moab is, but I'm just going to start to give you a little bit of context if you're not familiar with this area. Our boat ramp is kind of over to the right here, but I'm going to start and show you this really wonderful drone photo that's a 360-degree photo that this guy William Lee took that just happens to be perfect for my purposes in terms of showing the context of the site. We've got Highway 191 coming down as the main sort of route into Moab. Moab itself is about 3 miles away. And as you know, Moab's a huge recreation destination, almost year-round for a variety of different recreational activities, and one of them is boating. You can see the river. This is the Colorado River. It goes, sort of westward through this notch. From here you go down to the Potash boat ramp, and even on down to like Cataract Canyon and that section of the river. Right here on the south side of the bank, you can see Lions Park. This is relatively recently built within the last 10 or 12 years. There's a bathroom facility, there's picnic area, parking, places for people to just kind of hang out. When they were doing the planning for this site, they did kind of think about the boat ramp on the other side, but ended up not really pursuing anything at that time because their number one priority was to get this sort of transportation hub built. And I also just want to kind of point out something to keep in the back of your mind. Look at this riparian area along here, this corridor of brush and trees, kind of between the park and the river itself. But you can also see this access from the park across this pedestrian bridge to the north side of the river. This is part of a pretty extensive trail system in Moab. You can head up, north towards Arches. You can head upriver for a ways. And when we look up the river, you can see, the road really follows right along the river for a long ways. And there's just it's known as the Colorado Riverway. It's managed by the Bureau of Land Management. And there's just a whole system of boat access points, campgrounds, trailheads. You can put your boat right off the side of the road and into the river in a lot of different places. So lots of places to access the river. Really popular, it's called the Moab Daily Route. A lot of people are boating this both, commercially and just personally using this stretch of river. And this little parcel of land immediately upstream of our boat ramp, just kind of a riparian area. There's a active restoration effort going on here to try to improve native plant species along here. And actually you can kind of, if you climb up here, you can get up on top of this cliff, which is actually Arches National Park. So we're right adjacent to Arches National Park. But if we look down at our site, you see it's kind of this little narrow, small constrained spot where our boat ramp is. Historically, it was National Park Service property, but then it became Bureau of Land Management property. And then through an RMPP or River Recreation and Public Purposes agreement, Grand County took over the sort of management and maintenance of this site. But nothing's really happened there for a really long time. You can see it's not in the greatest shape, and I'll show you a couple more pictures in a minute. But there's a couple of layers of concrete here, this old boat ramp, and it's really eroding. You can see actually the edge here, which is in poor condition, is pretty dangerous. And you can see this water loadout here as well. There's some construction companies, some ranchers use this to take water out of the river. And so those heavy, trucks coming in here are, kind of competing for some space with boats and trailers and things like that. So that's the basic overview of our site. And I'm going to switch over to my PowerPoint, make that go full screen. Give me a shout if that's not presenting right, but I think that's okay.
Looks great.
Great. So how I got involved is, Grand County needed some assistance in kind of figuring out, what to do with this spot, fixing the boat ramp, making it more functional, making it safer for users. And because it's Moab and because there's a lot of recreational use and they're planning emergencies all the time, they kind of just needed some help focusing on this project, developing an action plan, coming up with a design, and that sort of the assistance that I'm providing is giving them that space to just figure this project out and get it done. But as you can see, you know, boat ramps in poor condition, it's eroding. There's this, you know, but like I said, that layer of concrete aspect that's, you know, kind of creating some issues. You know, vegetation coming up out of the eroded line. This is that water loadout line that's coming into the water. So these are a couple more pictures of that water loadout just to kind of understand how that's on the site. That's, you know, how people are coming in to get water out of the river here, you know, at the same time as boaters are using the site to access the river. This is just a really fun photo that one of my project partners sent me. You know, so, you know, historically, this spot has been used a lot for boating. This is back from the 1950s. And this is what it looks like today, and it's still, you know, getting used a lot. But as we were, you know, working with Grand County to address this site, you know, one of the things we needed to really figure out is like, how is this site being used? How are users, you know, what's functional for them, what's not functional for them, how are they using this site? And so I helped them put together a site visit, and this was just a couple of weeks ago, so this is really fresh and perfect for this discussion that we're having right now. And I put together kind of like a, you know, workshop and site visit to bring together a bunch of different people to look at this. And so who we had there is we have a planning team, and this planning team has kind of been meeting virtually for a bit to kind of get our ducks in a row and figure out, you know, what questions we need to ask, what we need to figure out as we, you know, put together an action plan and go for funding. But the planning team has sort of a number of people from Grand County and different departments: planning, economic development, roads, search and rescue. We have someone from Moab Parks and Rec, because they manage the Lions Park side of the river. We have the State Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands, because here in Utah, they manage the Colorado River to the high water mark, and they provide some really important technical knowledge of that site and the river. And we have a fellow he's a private boater, former NPS. He's representing the boating interests on our little planning team. But we knew that we needed to kind of look beyond that and like get some other stakeholders involved who can give us more information about this, you know, how they use this site. And so we put together this list of people. It included kind of a bunch of guides and outfitters, both motorized and non-motorized. Private boaters, you know, people just live in town and use this spot to get into the river. We had some representatives from the Bureau of Land Management, both because this site, you know, was originally managed by them, and also they manage the Colorado Riverway kind of upriver, and we want to make sure that we're being consistent with the other takeout spots that are upriver and the things that they're doing elsewhere up the river. And we had some folks that kind of were focused on the water loadout, because that was kind of an important piece. We had a couple guys from LeGrand Johnson. They're a construction company that used that water pump quite frequently. Utah Division of Wildlife Resources, State Park, so kind of whole wide range of people as part of this little group discussion. And also shout out to Darren Martins, who I think is on this call, and I think maybe a lot of you know, but he's a landscape architect with the Forest Service and Wyoming Department of Transportation, who does some river access planning and is kind of a frequent RTCA collaborator and friend. And I pulled him onto this project to help me kind of have this conversation and help develop a concept plan out of this. So Darren was really helpful with this conversation. This is where our river access planning guide comes in. Like when I was putting together this plan for this site visit, I wanted to kind of get my thoughts organized and what information I wanted to hear from these people. Like what do we need to gather? And so I got my access planning guide book, and I got my worksheet where I highlighted particular elements that I wanted to hear from folks, and I have my site map. So I got all ready for that, and we organized into kind of two sections of conversation. One, you know, where we had my flip chart up, and we were just brainstorming some ideas about users, about conflicts, about opportunities. And then we went over across to the boat ramp itself, and, you know, kind of as a group did some kind of site analysis where we were looking at the site together, looking at, you know, how was it functional, and what are the problems? Let's look at it together and kind of figure some stuff out on site. And in preparing for this, you know, I felt like I didn't need to use every single element of the worksheet. There are a lot of, you know, really important pieces of data that you can collect through that, but there were things that I could do just here from my computer, or, you know, have my planning team help with. But the ones that I really wanted to kind of hear from this group were like, how are you using this site? You know, what's the timing and the frequency of use? Those kinds of questions. And so, you know, I used that to, you know, people were just shouting out, you know, what the types of use were. It was boating, but it was also fishing and swimming and camping and all kinds of day use. So we needed to understand all of those different uses of the site as we were having these conversations. And we also were, you know, like, when is the heaviest use? You know, this is Moab, it's a recreation destination. It's used all year, almost all year round. But we were talking about like, okay, we see a lot of use mostly kind of from March to October in terms of river running, with the highest use between June and August. Holidays and weekends are big, but it's really all week long. The construction guys are using it, you know, during the week for about 10 months of the year. We have folks from Moab who would come, you know, after a work day and just drop their stand-up paddleboard in the river for an hour. So, you know, lots of different use throughout most of the year. So it was really important to kind of gather that information from folks. And when I came back, you know, home and was, you know, going through my notes, I was able to kind of put them into the worksheet, and in that way gathered all this information in one place that was going to be useful for us in the future as we kind of put together an action plan. Yeah, the next part of our conversation was just conflicts and challenges. You know, there's not enough parking, there's not a good place to turn around, there's no like delineation on the boat ramp to show where, you know, who should go where, all those kinds of issues that we could really make better if we improve the boat ramp. And so, you know, having those conversations, that kind of led us to what are some of our opportunities. We're not in the design phase yet, but a lot of, you know, ideas were kind of percolating around in our site discussion in terms of, you know, making the ramp just longer and in a way that would, you know, serve people better, you know, extend further into the water. Thinking about climate change, we're thinking about, you know, we might see a lot lower river levels overall in the future, so being prepared for that, but also we might have greater flood events. And so thinking about if we're going to put a vault toilet in the site, where might that need to be so that it's out of some of those flood events. Just looking at some of those kind of ideas while we were talking. You know, obviously from the conversation we were having, there's a huge need for places to load and unload and de-rig, better parking, circulation. But we also heard some things that we hadn't quite thought of before, like the two LeGrand Johnson construction guys were like, hey, if we're going to pave this parking lot, maybe we could bury the water line so that where it comes out by the river, you know, is still kind of in the same place, but where we load it into our trucks is back by the cliff, and we keep the trucks back there while, you know, giving room for the boat trailers to still use the ramp. So that's something we never thought about, and we still need to figure out how that's going to work. But that was a real benefit of having, you know, kind of that variety of stakeholders on site and talking about those conflicts and talking about potential options to fix it. That was really helpful. And another one that we had kind of come up, but we hadn't focused on, was maybe we can separate some of these activities, you know, some of the, you know, the swimmers, the personal watercraft where it's the stand-up paddle boards, the kayakers, maybe we can move those over onto the Lions Park side. And, you know, where that's more of a kind of a laid back day use area, maybe that's a good spot to move some of those other activities so that we're removing some of the conflict on the boat ramp, leaving that for the heavier like raft and motorized boat use, while we're using some of the, you know, the quieter activities to the other side. So that's something we're going to look at moving forward after having that conversation with everybody. And, you know, I'm not going to spend too much time, but I kind of started collecting a mood board of the things that we saw. I went up to some of the other boat ramps up and down river to see, you know, how they had delineated their parking areas, their loadout, looked at their shade structure. So looking at other places along the river for ideas for what could happen at this site was really useful as well. And again, shout out to Darren. He is kind of helping capture some of these ideas that we had from folks in kind of a bubble diagram, a little concept, kind of getting some of those, ideas about how are we separating users, how are we, better serving their, circulation and access. And we're going to use that to hopefully refine some ideas and go for a concept design kind of as our next step. So some big takeaways just as in wrapping up, kind of like Ashley said, that these worksheets are really helpful in terms of creating sort of a common language and using that to structure conversations. It really helped me to ask the right questions when I was on site with this group of stakeholders. And again, it is flexible. You can use it, use the pieces of it that are relevant to you and to your project as you go along. And my last takeaway, enlist a lot of users and stakeholders to help you kind of gather this information, because you'll hear a wide range of information and ideas, and that was really helpful for me in this particular planning problem. So that's me wrapped up. Angie, if there are any questions, I think I can toss it to Doug.
Yeah, I got one question for you. Well, first, I just wanted to point out some of your slides were cut off, so we can provide the PDF of your slides along with the recording for anyone. And then also, I had one question come in here. Are there any standards that were referred to about parking lot distance from the launch?
We didn't talk standards, but we did. One of the things we talked about is like, how many cars do you think you need parking for in here in terms of cars with trailers, that sort of thing. And so, one of our opportunities with this site is we think we can kind of extend into the open space upriver. So we might have enough room to kind of increase that parking. But we didn't talk about like how far away that would need to be from like the ramp itself or from the river.
Okay, great. I saw some comments about some great footage, that aerial footage there at the beginning as well. So, and if there's any other questions that come in, we can discuss those at the end. So Doug, right now, I believe we are seeing your screen and we see the GoToWebinar window.
Well, I'm not seeing my slides, so I don't know why that is.
Stop you real quick and let's see if we can get you to find your presentation, and then I will give you the again. Right now we
you want me to share the screen on mine?
Yes, you know what? I'm so sorry, Doug. It was me. All right, hold on. Pulling it up right here. All right, we should be set.
All right. Well, interesting to hear the two examples and how those worksheets are helping. I think those I think worksheets are a really great way to go through the issues, especially if you're in a group of people, and especially if you're on site. You kind of got the trifecta there. You've got everybody that you want to talk to, and they're all there on site. This database thing that we're talking about is an attempt to try and get people a virtual version of some of those things. So the idea was to just get more examples of launch sites with all their good features, bad features, or strange features, so that people could just get a wider view of the world and get some ideas in their head. And it's sort of I don't know exactly how I think Tom probably invented the idea of this, but the bottom line was that we thought that if we got a lot of people to help us essentially fill out these forms for a bunch of different launches, we'd start to learn which things are standard and which things are not, which things are always there and which things are not, which things are strange and that sort of thing. I don't know if it's been that great of a tool from an analysis point of view, but I think as an example point of view, it's great. It provides if you're looking for some other places like your place, this database can help you find those, and then you can go look at those one by one, or even call up the person that uses that. So that's what the idea is behind this database. We enlisted the help of many people, probably close to 50 people contributed different launches, and they filled out basically an 80 variable worksheet, if you will. Maybe click to the next slide, if you can, Angie. Yeah, so we had basically 5 categories, probably very similar to the types of things that Tom's got in those worksheets. There were 80 things that we filled out in the database. There were questions that people had to answer about their launch, and they're related to the kinds of things that these guys have just been talking about. You know, where is it? What kind of a place is it? What stuff is there? What facilities are there? What types of use are occurring there, if you know, and what levels of use? That turned out to be one of the harder things for people to answer. And then kind of what's the management setup there? And then some specific issues that are related to specific designs. So we have information about all of those things for about, click to the next slide. I think it's over 250 different places. Yeah, 265 different places now. And it's just in a spreadsheet. So it's just in an Excel spreadsheet. The project funding didn't quite cover turning this into something super interactive so that people could query it and get it to filter. But if you know how to use Excel spreadsheets, you can go in there and click on a variable and then get it in ascending order or descending order, you know, sort it. And that'll help you find places like your place, depending on what you're looking for. And that's how we've been helping people use it, and they've been telling us that they have been using it. And so you find similar places, and then you can go take a look at that list and then say, oh, I'd like to take a look at that. And we might have a picture of it. We might have multiple pictures of that place. And we have all this other information about that site. So it tells you lots of things about an individual site if you go looking for it. Our hope is to someday make this a more interactive database where it does have queries that somebody who's not so proficient in Excel can use it. But to date, that hasn't quite happened yet. Click to the next slide. So I thought what I would just do to finish up here, and I guess I don't know how much time, but probably less than 5 minutes. I just wanted to show some examples of photos from the gallery. First of all, I'll tell you that there is we created a slideshow about this database that includes, I think, over 80 photos of it. So that's another place to just go someday when you're just, you've decided that you're going to browse the internet and you're looking for something that's actually related to your work instead. You can go look at these and it'll give you some good ideas. I thought I would just pick out a few of my favorites from there, in particular related to one sort of issue, boat slides and the actual way that the ramps hit the water, and just look at some of the innovative ideas that come out of this database where we have examples of that. So here's just a couple of examples of that. So here's one of my favorites. That's a place in South Carolina. Has it's on salt water, so it goes up and down with the tide. I suspect it has a 2 or 3 foot tide for that part of the world. And kayakers use it, and they need to get back up in and out of their boats, mostly recreation kayaks, but they still need a place to do that. It's hard to do on water, so they've got this ramp that sort of set up there that you can shove people off into it. And it's got a nice way of getting people up over the riprap and to the parking lot. So that's just one example. Click on the next slide. Somebody was asking about like the highest use place or the place with the best facilities or whatnot. I'm not ready to give you my thoughts on superlatives quite as quick as Tom was, although I think he did pick the highest use place in the country. But I think this is one that's ranks as probably low use, or let's see, high use but low frequency, and tricky. And this is a place where they're going into a class 5 kayaking gorge, and they have to get down a very steep gorge to get there, and they use stairs to do it. And this was fairly elaborate. There was FERC money involved, so they could do this. but it's really an interesting put in for a very challenging place to go boating. And when they have flows there, which isn't that often, it's a few times a year, they need to be able to get a lot of people down there and get them on the river safely and whatnot. And apparently that it works pretty well. So it's sort of an interesting and unusual solution to a problem there. Go ahead and click to the next one. The other end of the spectrum, here's a place that's high density, high frequency. It's in Yosemite National Park, and there's a concession there that rents these kind of 2 to 3 person boats, and they walk these boats over from where the rafts are located, a big old hockey rink with a bunch of boats in them, and then they create a bunch of erosion when they get to the river because they're just trying to put on right away. The park needed to fix this, which they did by actually picking a better access site, a better place, a beach, and they have the concession bring the boats over to the beach instead of having the visitors carry the boats to the beach. But in either case, you need to sort of they had to visualize what was going to happen and where, and what was the best kind of place for it. And they had started with, well, the boats are over in this place, we need to get the boats to the river, and they built a trail to it. But it turns out that's probably not the best way to go. And so it was useful to think about that, especially with the kind of volume of people that they have using this place. Go ahead and click on the next one. Boat slides seem to be of interest to people. It's a way of getting down. So we have a lot of erosion problems at rivers, dynamic. It was good discussion about dynamic rivers for those ones in the Mark Twain, or the Ozarks rather. When your river's moving around, it really messes with your access planning, especially if you're building infrastructure, and where you build your infrastructure goes to a river that later moves and is someplace else. That's a bad deal, right? So boat slides are pretty good because they usually go down steep banks, and steep banks tend to be fairly stable in terms of where they are. They don't move quite like alluvial gravel bars do. So you'd love to have your boat launch at a stable part of the river, the place where it's a confined channel is not going to move, but then it's steep and it's hard to get boats up and down. Really hard to get them up. It's actually easy to get them down. These boat slides work really best as put-ins, not so great as takeouts, unless you're willing to have a winch or some sort of system like that. So Tom showed you an earlier version of the Boundary Creek put-in on the Middle Fork Salmon, place that is used heavily during the summer, right? There's 8 launches a day, and most trips have 5 to 10 boats on them. So lots of boats down there. Small eddy, big enough eddy for all those boats to fit, but only if they're next to each other. And you put your gear on your boat and put it down the slide. So it has to be a fairly robust situation. And this one does fit that description and is used effectively for that. Everybody has to figure out how to use ropes and friction to get their boats down without losing them. But if you do that, it works pretty well. Go ahead to the next slide. Let's see. Oh, this is one that's on the South Fork Payette, and it's one of those ones where it's exciting for kayakers who want to go in this way, but it's really designed for rafts and a friction launch. But kayakers have figured out that it's an entertaining way to go. It fits with Tom's category of challenge. If you've got people like this, you might want to think hard about what kind of ramp you want to build on there, and whether or not that's a good idea, because it's kind of an attractive nuisance for folks to go on there. I've heard you can go faster if you throw a bucket of water on it first. So, next slide. It is possible to create boat slides that actually have winch systems built on them that allow you to take boats back up or lower them down with more safety. But once you start building that hardware, and you have to make sure that people know how to use it, and that that there may be some liability issues associated with that. So that's sort of an interesting aside. All of these are just, and this is just kind of by way of showing you how this database can work. It can give you ideas because you can go look at photos. There's nothing better than just kind of flipping through photos and getting ideas. The database can also help you, find some specific places with the kinds of characteristics that your river has, And then you might be able to talk to the people from those places. And I think we have contact information for many of the entries. And so that allows you to kind of seek out somebody who and say, well, how did you deal with this problem or that problem? So I think that can be helpful as well. Click on it one more time. I'm not sure exactly what I was going for on this slide. Oh, I think what's cool here is they've designed a way to get your boat right next to the boat slide, or your trailer right next to the boat slide. And it's designed specifically for the trailers that get used in this kind of place. That's pretty clever and a good deal if you can kind of think that through. So back to the original question of which are the best examples from the entire database for the whole country or whatever. It sort of depends on what you're looking for, but if you do peruse the data set long enough, you usually will find a place that has some characteristics that you really care about and you want to learn more about. And I think that's its best use to date. Okay, I think that's one more. I'm going to show about this thing. I've forgotten where this place even is. Sorry about that. This is I think the same photo that Tom showed earlier, and it's just highlighting another issue. The other big issue that examples seem to be helpful with are how do you handle the staging areas in the confined channels or the confined areas that these sites often have. And the answer to that is that it's pretty variable. I mean, obviously, if you have more real estate, it allows you to do a lot more. But like in that example from Moab, there isn't a lot of real estate over there. So that's the central challenge is organizing use so it's efficient. And that's both in water and just the staging area right at the top of the ramp or at the where boats are getting ready to be put into the water. Those are the two crunch places that seem to happen. And it's really helpful to look at a lot of different examples, which the database shows. Okay, last slide perhaps. Yeah, this is a good one to end with. This is one in Jackson Hole. It's the county is operating this place, and it's near a place where the channel has been changing in recent years. And there used to be some good separation between places where privates could put in and the commercial folks are kind of doing more of their buses driving up and trailers and that sort of thing. And then the place, the river started moving river left. And so then the river right private place dried up and disappeared. The place where people used to go and hang out as sort of a beach scene disappeared. And then the outfitters and guides wanted to drive their vehicles to the water and get things a lot closer. And it meant driving across gravel bars and that sort of thing. All stuff that's hard to do. Hard for the county to go get permits from the Corps of Engineers and whatnot to do any of that, you know, to put in gravel or put in something to make the road viable and whatnot. So it's been sort of a problematic area. And they're still working on this place, but I think that they have figured out a single road to the river for dropping boats, and then you can move the boats off to the side so that they're not in each other's way when they're staging. Anyway, interesting place with a dynamic channel and some interesting solutions. Okay, I think that's enough for me, but I'm happy to take questions as well. Thanks,
Doug. Yeah, so we do have about 5 more minutes for some questions, and I'll invite all of our presenters to come on just in case anyone has some input. And again, I want to thank them all so much for their presentations. One that I saw come in that was interesting was any perspective on management agreements and funding. Our nonprofit advocates plans and even funds project construction, but struggles with municipalities that have limited to no funds for ongoing or future maintenance.
Yeah, and I'm not sure I have easy answers, but that's where really documenting and understanding the you know, the management framework that you're dealing with is important. And so is it a place where we have the resources and capacity for more active management, or is it a place that needs to function on its own more, you know, where there's not a lot of resources for active management, and then that can drive some of the design considerations?
I think I'd add to that is that might be an important reason to have like a lot of stakeholders kind of help you figure out your project, because if they feel a little, you know, emotionally bought into your site, they might be able to help you long term with fundraising or, you know, adopt a ramp programs or something like that, something to maybe look into. And I don't have perfect answers for that, but you know, there's some other examples from like the trails world that maybe could be replicated in the boating world.
Yes, thank you both.
Too was, yeah, I was just being able to get your stakeholders involved in that way, and also thinking about what organizations would be interested to donate as well. So thinking about like the outdoor recreation companies too. Sometimes they have an interest in that, and they are willing to donate for the planning even as well.
See another question. This one's for Betsy. Are there 1 or 2 landscape design resources that you would recommend looking into regarding planning sites or project near water or specific to park and rec access?
Ooh, I mean, that's part of why I got Darren involved in this with me, so we can get us another landscape architect involved in kind of designing the site. I also reached out to, we have here in Utah, a boater access grant, and the fellow who manages that program has some examples of past grants that have been successful and like some good design tips from that. And, you know, I asked him for, you know, who's good at that in Utah and designing these kinds of sites. So I'd actually say ask around your local networks for maybe some of that, some site design help. But in terms of like a specific resource I can point you to say, hey, this is exactly how you design the site. I'll have to think about that.
Thanks, Betsy. And as people have heard a couple of times, we've mentioned Darren Martins. And so I just want to take a quick moment to plug our next, well, I'll go back to that, to our next webinar on March 15th. We're going to be having Darren Martins speak, as well as Jordan Sector, who's one of the co-authors of the River Access Planning Guide. And we're going to be looking beyond the first 2 steps at preparing to make your site decisions. So if you haven't already, I encourage you to go register for that and join us. It'll be the same time on March 15th. And then I also want to take a quick moment to say thank you to everyone who has stayed with us through this hour and a half. And if you would like your own paper copy of the River Access Planning Guide, we've got some that we are willing to mail out to you. So you can just send me an email with your mailing address and we will get those in the mail and you can have your own paper copy. But it is also available for download on the RMS website as well at that link there. So I'm trying to see if we have any other, oh, I did see a follow-up, and this might be geared towards Betsy. Do you work with rowing communities? Or maybe this is for anyone.
We certainly would. Our TCA, if it's a particular user group that wants to develop a facility and work with their community to do that, we would absolutely do that. I know here in Salt Lake City, we have a couple of rowing groups that use the Jordan River. I haven't helped them particularly, but I think we certainly could do that. That would actually be really fun. And also just back to that former question, the guide Prepare to Launch might be a good resource for folks. You can access that on our RMS website, I believe, but that can provide some sort of site design tips that might be useful for folks.
Mm-hmm. Well, great. Thank you all again to all of the attendees, as well as to all of today's presenters. As a reminder, I will be cleaning up this video, editing it, and posting it, along with a bunch of the links that we've shared and links to the handouts. So that way you can go out there and use those worksheets as you're working through your river access planning projects. We'd also love to hear any feedback that you have around these worksheets, as we are always trying to make them better. So please let us know how your projects are going and how those worksheets help out for you. So thanks again, everyone, and have a great rest of your Tuesday.